I had been keeping this story to myself for a long time. Even now, years later, I still find myself thinking about that night and wondering if we truly understood what we were walking into. For some context, I am in my 30s now, but this happened when I was still in high school. I have decided not to use my real name or the real names of anyone involved. The place I am about to describe is a real location, and people familiar with the area could probably figure out exactly where it was. I honestly do not know if we could still get into trouble for what we did, so it is better to keep certain details private. Growing up in my hometown, there was a place that everyone knew about, but nobody really talked about openly. It was an abandoned military village that had been left to decay for decades. According to the information I later found online, the base had been used during both World War II and the Cold War era. At its peak, more than 200 military families lived there. It was not just a collection of buildings. It was an actual community. There were homes, a church, roads, and everything people needed to live their daily lives. Looking back, that was probably the strangest part. It was once a place full of normal people. Children played outside. Families ate dinner together. Soldiers returned home after long days. It was a place filled with ordinary memories. But then one day everyone left. The village was officially abandoned in 1984. The buildings remained untouched for years, slowly being swallowed by nature. For decades it sat there like a forgotten piece of history until it was finally demolished in 2014. But before that happened, the abandoned village became something much bigger than just an old military site. It became a legend. When I was growing up, everyone in the area had heard stories about it. It was the kind of place that teenagers whispered about late at night, the kind of place where every person seemed to have a different version of what happened there. Some people claimed strange lights could be seen moving through the abandoned buildings at night. Others said they heard voices coming from empty houses. There were rumors about secret underground tunnels, hidden military experiments, and even groups performing strange rituals inside the abandoned church. Of course, most of these stories were probably exaggerated. That is how local legends grow. One person tells a story, another person adds a detail, and before long, nobody knows where reality ends and imagination begins. But regardless of whether the stories were true, the abandoned village had a strange reputation. Everyone knew about it. Everyone was curious about it. And everyone was a little afraid of it. When I was in middle school, my older brother once came into my room while I was hanging out with some friends. He had this serious expression on his face, and he told us something that immediately grabbed our attention. He claimed he had actually been inside the abandoned village. At first, none of us believed him. We thought he was just trying to scare us. But then he started describing details. He talked about the old church sitting in the middle of the village. He told us there was supposedly a hidden door in the floor near the altar. According to him, beneath that door was a basement where he heard strange sounds. He said he heard what sounded like people crying, screaming, and making noises that he could not explain. The way he told the story was convincing. His face looked serious. His voice sounded nervous. For a moment, we actually believed him. Looking back, I am sure he was probably just trying to mess with us. But whether his story was real or not, it had the exact effect he wanted. It made the abandoned village even more mysterious. From that point on, my friends and I became obsessed with the place. For years, we traded stories about it. We talked about what might be hidden there. We imagined walking through the abandoned houses, exploring the church, and discovering something nobody else had seen. We always told ourselves that one day when we were old enough to drive, we would finally go there. But throughout high school, we never actually did it. There were two main reasons. First, we did not know the exact location. We knew it was somewhere near the airport, but that area was huge. There were restricted zones, private roads, and plenty of signs warning people to stay away. Second, even though the village was abandoned, it was still technically part of a military property. We had no idea what would happen if we were caught. Would we just get kicked out? Would we get arrested? Would there be serious consequences? We did not know. Then one cool spring night during our senior year, everything changed. One of my friends, Alex, came to us with a confident look on his face. He told us he knew where the entrance was. At first, we laughed. There was no way we believed him. For years, everyone had claimed they knew where the village was, but nobody ever actually took us there. Alex insisted he was telling the truth. He said someone he knew had been there before and had given him the location. I was convinced he was bluffing. So, I made a decision. I told him we should go. Honestly, I thought we would drive around for a while, fail to find anything, and come home with a funny story. I never expected us to actually find it. That night around 11:00 p.m., we got into my car and drove toward the area Alex described. The drive was only about 15 minutes, but it felt longer because none of us really knew what we were looking for. Alex kept pointing at random roads. "Pull over. I think this is it." Every few seconds he would say the same thing, but every time we were wrong. Just another empty road. Just another dead end. Just another place that looked nothing like the entrance to a forgotten military village. Eventually we found something. It was an old dirt road almost completely hidden by overgrown trees and vegetation. There was a faded "No Trespassing" sign hanging there, partially covered by branches. The second I saw it, my excitement disappeared. I started feeling nervous. This was no longer just a story. We were actually standing at the entrance. Since it was my car, I was the one who would have to deal with the consequences if something happened. But Alex and another friend, Nick, did not hesitate at all. They wanted to keep going. They reminded me that we had talked about this for years. This was the moment we had been waiting for. After a long argument, they convinced me. I slowly drove onto the dirt road. To avoid being noticed, I turned off the headlights and let the car move forward, using only the faint light from the dashboard. The road was uneven and covered with branches. The darkness around us felt heavy. After a few minutes, we reached a large metal security gate. It was one of those old barriers that could be raised and lowered to block vehicles. There was nobody there. No guard. No lights. No movement. Just silence. I got out of the car and manually lifted the gate. That was the first moment when the entire situation started to feel wrong. As we continued driving, we began noticing things scattered along the roadside. Furniture, old mattresses, broken tables, dressers, beds. It looked like someone had taken everything from abandoned homes and thrown it outside. But the strangest part was that it did not look like a place that had been forgotten. It looked like a place that had been emptied suddenly, like people had left in a hurry. A few minutes later, we reached another gate. This time, Alex got out to open it. Once we passed through, there was no turning back. We were inside. The abandoned village was right in front of us. After hearing stories about that place for most of our lives, finally seeing it in person was almost unreal. It felt like stepping into another world. The closest comparison I can make is the feeling of walking into a place that should not exist anymore. The streets were empty. The houses stood silently in the darkness. Nature had started reclaiming everything. It looked like a forgotten neighborhood frozen in time. The buildings were familiar, but something about them felt completely wrong. Like the village was waiting. Like it was holding on to something. I parked the car in front of the old church. We all got out and started exploring. The first thing I noticed was the complete lack of security cameras. That gave me a small sense of relief. Maybe nobody would know we were there. Maybe we would just leave with a crazy story. The church was the first place we entered, and it was disturbing. The walls were covered with graffiti. The inside was damaged and covered in dust. The atmosphere was cold and uncomfortable. I immediately thought about my brother's story from years earlier. The hidden door, the secret basement, the sounds beneath the church. I searched around near the altar, expecting to find nothing. And I was right. There was no secret door, no hidden entrance, nothing. But somehow that did not make the place feel any less unsettling. After leaving the church, we explored some of the houses. That was when the reality of the village truly hit us. These were not just abandoned buildings. They were homes, places where families once lived. There were still rooms that looked almost normal. Other buildings were completely destroyed, as if they had been torn apart by storms or years of neglect. But strangely, the houses that were still intact were the ones that bothered me the most. A broken building makes sense. A destroyed place has an explanation. But seeing a perfectly preserved home sitting empty in the darkness creates a different feeling. It makes you wonder what happened. Why did everyone leave? What happened inside these walls? One of my friends, Scott, was clearly uncomfortable the entire time. He kept looking around nervously. He repeatedly said that he felt like someone was watching us. We told him he was just letting his imagination get the best of him. After all, we were walking around an abandoned military village in the middle of the night. Anyone would feel uneasy. At least, that is what we told ourselves. Then, while exploring one of the houses, something happened that none of us could explain. We were walking through one of the rooms when suddenly, all of us stopped. At first, nobody said anything, because we all heard it. A sound. A strange, unnatural sound. It was not the normal noise of an old building settling. It was not the wind. It sounded like footsteps, like someone slowly walking across the wooden floor somewhere inside the house. Every person in the room heard it. We looked at each other, trying to convince ourselves there was a logical explanation. Then Alex suddenly shouted, "Is someone there?" The sound stopped immediately, not faded away, not slowly disappeared. It just stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the noise itself. For a full minute, none of us moved. We stood there in the darkness trying to understand what had just happened. And for the first time that night, none of us were laughing. None of us were joking. Because deep down, we all had the same thought. Maybe we were not alone in that abandoned village. Alex and Nick were convinced there was a perfectly normal explanation for what we had heard. They believed it was just an old abandoned house settling, old wood, weak floors, the wind pushing against the walls. They were trying to convince themselves, and maybe they were trying to convince me too. But Scott was different. He was completely certain we were not alone. The look on his face said everything. He was not joking anymore. He was not trying to scare us. He genuinely believed there was someone else inside that village with us. At that point, I did not care about proving anything. I did not care about the stories. I did not care about exploring every building like we had dreamed about for years. I just wanted to leave. I told everyone that we were done and that we were going back to the car. I could immediately tell Alex and Nick were disappointed. They wanted to stay longer. They wanted to keep searching, but I was the one driving. And after everything we had already experienced, I was not willing to risk staying another minute. So we headed toward the front door. That was when everything changed. As we were walking out, Scott suddenly stopped. He froze. Then, without saying a word, he slowly stepped backward. His eyes were locked on something outside the house. He raised his hand and quietly pointed toward one of the windows on the side of the room. At first, I did not understand what he was seeing. Then I looked, and my entire body went cold. Outside the window on the side of the neighboring house, there were shadows moving. Not one, not two, 3 shadows. They were dark shapes almost like the silhouettes of human heads moving back and forth. They were too clear to be branches, too controlled to be caused by the wind. They were moving like people standing just outside the window. The entire room went silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed loudly, because in that moment we all understood the same thing. Someone was out there. Slowly trying not to make a sound, I walked toward the window and looked outside. I could not see any people directly, but I saw the shadows move. They disappeared around the side of the house and headed toward the backyard of the building we were standing in. That was enough. I turned around and whispered as quietly as possible, "We need to run." Nobody argued. Nobody questioned me. We all nodded. Then we ran. We sprinted out of that house as fast as we could. The fear we had been trying to ignore finally took over. The abandoned village that had once felt like an adventure suddenly felt like a trap. The darkness around us seemed endless as we raced toward the car. Then when the vehicle finally came into view, Scott, who was running ahead of us, suddenly screamed. Not a normal scream. A scream of pure terror. We all stopped and looked in the same direction. And that was when we saw her. Standing beside the back door of my car was a woman. She was tall. Unnaturally tall. She was wearing an old black dress that looked dirty and worn like something pulled from another time. The back door of my car was open, and she was already getting inside. One of her legs was halfway into the back seat. For a moment, none of us moved. My mind could not process what I was seeing. There was no explanation. No reason she should have been there. No reason she should have been touching my car. Then she heard Scott scream. She immediately turned. She released the door and suddenly ran. But instead of running away from us, she ran straight toward the old church. She disappeared inside. We did not wait to find out why. We ran straight to the car. I opened the door, jumped inside, and immediately looked into the back seat. Thankfully, nobody was there. I started the engine and we drove. Fast, faster than I probably should have. The dirt road was uneven and I was driving with pure adrenaline controlling me. At one point I lost control slightly and the car slid across the dirt. For a second I thought we were going to crash, but somehow we managed to regain control and get out of there. None of us spoke much on the drive home. We were all trying to understand what had just happened. Later that night we talked about different possibilities. The most logical explanation was that the people we encountered were probably homeless individuals using the abandoned military village as a shelter. That explanation made sense. Abandoned buildings often attract people looking for somewhere hidden to stay. But one question bothered all of us. Why was that woman trying to get inside my car? She was not hiding. She was not simply walking around. She had opened the door and was climbing into the back seat. And what made the whole thing even stranger was that we had been there for a long time. We walked through multiple buildings. We explored the church. We searched several houses. We never saw another person, not even a sign that someone had been there. Then right when we were about to leave, suddenly there were people watching us. Even though Scott claimed he heard something earlier, I still believed at the time that his imagination was getting the better of him. But after what happened at the car, I started questioning everything. Years later, I told my girlfriend the entire story. She became curious and suggested that we look up the abandoned village to see if it still existed. That was when I found out something surprising. The entire place had been demolished in 2014. Gone. The buildings that haunted our childhood stories no longer existed. What surprised me even more was how much information was available online now. When I was younger, we searched constantly for details about that place. We wanted proof. We wanted pictures. We wanted answers. But there was almost nothing. The lack of information only made the stories grow stronger. It allowed the mystery to survive. Looking back, I am just grateful that we decided to leave when we did. I am grateful that Scott noticed those shadows. I am grateful that he screamed when he saw that woman. Because sometimes the smallest moment can completely change the outcome of a situation. If we had reached the car just a few seconds earlier or later, if Scott had not looked up at that exact moment, I honestly do not know how that night would have ended. And that thought still bothers me. Because whatever was happening inside that abandoned village, one thing remains certain. We were not as alone as we thought. Years later, I still think about that night. Not because I believe every ghost story I hear, not because I am convinced we encountered something supernatural, but because I experienced something I still cannot fully explain. And sometimes the scariest things are not the things we can prove. They are the moments that leave us wondering what really happened. When my wife and I first started dating, we were much more reckless than we are today. Not in a way that intentionally hurt anyone, but we definitely made choices that I would never make now. Some of those choices involved ignoring rules and entering places where we probably should not have been. We were fascinated by abandoned buildings. She especially loved searching through old houses looking for signs that something unexplained had happened there. She believed in ghosts. I did not. I never really bought into paranormal stories. But I liked her, and honestly I enjoyed seeing how excited she became every time we discovered a new abandoned place. So I went along with it. Over the years, we explored plenty of forgotten buildings, old homes, empty factories, abandoned structures that looked like they had been frozen in time. Most of the time, nothing happened. A few strange noises, a few creepy moments, but nothing that ever made me question reality, except for one house. That one place is different, because even now I still cannot explain what I saw, and I do not think I ever will. It happened on a night when the sky was completely covered by clouds. There was no moonlight, no stars, just darkness. The kind of darkness that makes every shadow look deeper than it should. My wife had discovered an old house far away from any neighborhood. It was isolated, forgotten. The kind of place where you immediately wondered why anyone would ever build a home there. The house looked like it was barely standing. I was always nervous entering abandoned buildings, but not because I was afraid of ghosts. My fear was much more practical. I was afraid the floor would collapse. I was afraid the ceiling would fall. I was afraid we would step somewhere we should not. And this house looked especially dangerous. The front door had been boarded shut. I had to force my way inside. The moment we entered, I noticed something strange. What used to be the living room was barely recognizable. Half of the floor was missing. There was a massive hole in the center of the room where the basement could be seen below. I looked down with my flashlight and immediately felt uneasy. I told her we should leave. The house was clearly unsafe, but she ignored me. She always had the same response whenever I wanted to leave. Just give me one more minute. She loved exploring. She loved searching through forgotten belongings and imagining the stories behind them. She moved carefully through the house while I stayed near the entrance. I told her I was not moving because I did not trust the floor. She laughed and called me a coward. A few minutes passed. Eventually, curiosity won. I walked into the next room where she was searching. The room was filled with junk. Boxes stacked everywhere. Old furniture. Broken objects. She was digging through everything, hoping to find something left behind by the previous owners. That was always her favorite part. I wanted no part of it. She pointed toward the upstairs and told me to search there. Before I could complain, she reminded me that the sooner we finished exploring the house, the sooner we could leave. Reluctantly, I walked upstairs. Every step felt dangerous. I expected the floor to collapse beneath me at any moment. At the top of the stairs was a bedroom, immediately to the right. I entered. Inside was an old bed. Surprisingly, it was still made. At the end of the bed was a folded bathrobe. That was the first thing that really bothered me. It looked like someone had simply walked away, like they planned to return, but they never did. The rest of the room was filled with old clothes, broken decorations, and furniture that looked like it could fall apart with the slightest touch. In one corner was a small crawl space. I had found interesting things in crawl spaces before, so I decided to look. Inside were boxes of old baby supplies, diapers, baby food, things that had never been opened, but they were ancient, covered in dust, covered in cobwebs. Some of the containers had been torn apart by rodents. The smell was horrible. I was about to leave when I heard something, a creaking sound. I froze. I turned on my flashlight and searched the crawl space. Then I noticed something I had somehow missed. In the corner was another opening, a narrow passage leading deeper into the house. The sound was coming from inside. It sounded like footsteps, or something moving. The passage was too small for me to crawl through comfortably, so I backed out and decided to check the other bedroom instead. As I walked down the hallway, the creaking continued, and it became louder, closer. My heart started racing, not because I believed in ghosts. I was expecting an animal, maybe a raccoon, maybe something living inside the walls. But when I reached the doorway, the sound was clear. I stepped inside, and I stopped, because sitting in the corner of the room was a woman. She was sitting in an old rocking chair, facing the window, rocking slowly back and forth. I could only see the back of her head, the outline of her shoulders, and what looked like a long skirt covering her legs. For several seconds I could not move. I tried looking for her reflection in the window, but the darkness outside was too thick. I could not see her face. I could not tell who she was. I finally took one step forward. The floor creaked. Immediately, the rocking stopped. The woman became completely still. I panicked and started apologizing. I told her we did not know anyone lived there. I was about to explain everything, but before I could finish, she started rocking again, slowly, calmly, almost like my presence did not matter, like she had expected me. For some reason, instead of running, I took another step closer. I asked if she was okay. The moment I stepped forward, the chair stopped again. Then the woman slowly stood up, and when she turned slightly toward me, I heard something. Not words, not a scream, just a sound. A low, unnatural hum. A sound that did not feel like it came from a normal conversation. And standing there in that abandoned house, listening to that strange humming in the darkness, I realized something. I was no longer searching for proof that ghosts existed. I was hoping they did not. Then, without warning, the woman suddenly stopped humming, and in the next second, she turned around. Fast. Much faster than I expected. Her sudden movement made my entire body freeze. I jumped back instinctively, and before my mind could even process what I was seeing, I turned around and ran. I wish I could describe her face. I wish I could tell you exactly what she looked like. But everything happened too quickly. I only caught a brief glimpse before fear took over. All I remember was that she looked extremely old. Her skin appeared loose and wrinkled. Her presence felt strange. Wrong. There was something about the way she moved that made every instinct inside me scream to get away. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could. By the time I reached the bottom, I was shouting, "We need to leave." My girlfriend looked at me like I had completely lost my mind. I tried explaining what happened. I told her someone was upstairs. I told her we were not alone. I told her there was a woman in that bedroom, but instead of being scared, she laughed. She genuinely thought I was messing with her. She thought I was trying to scare her because I had finally fallen into the same kind of curiosity that brought us there. I kept pleading with her. I told her we needed to get out immediately. I told her I was serious, but she would not listen. She wanted to see for herself. She said there was no way someone could still be living in that house. I begged her not to go upstairs. I told her something was wrong, but she ignored me. At this point, I was almost panicking. I was raising my voice, telling her to stop telling her we needed to leave, but she continued walking, so I followed. Not because I wanted to, because I could not let her go up there alone. We slowly made our way back upstairs. Every step felt heavier than the last. The hallway seemed darker than before. When we reached the bedroom at the end of the hall, she stopped in the doorway. Then I heard her voice. Oh my God. My heart dropped. I rushed toward her, expecting to see something terrible. But when I reached the doorway, she suddenly started laughing. Inside the room was the rocking chair, exactly where it had been before, but the woman was gone. There was nobody there. My girlfriend turned around and looked at me. She was laughing because she thought I had been scared by an empty chair. She asked if that was what terrified me, the rocking chair. I stood there completely confused. I told her again that there had been a woman sitting there, an old woman, a real person. I told her I had seen her, but my girlfriend kept laughing. She walked into the room and searched every corner, behind the door, inside the closet, around the windows. Nothing. No woman. No explanation. She looked at me like she was trying to understand how I could have been so certain. Then she walked past me and said we could finally leave. At that point, I almost felt embarrassed. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the darkness and the atmosphere had played tricks on my mind. Maybe there was some logical explanation. Then we heard it. The sound. The same sound from before. A slow, steady creaking. The sound of the rocking chair moving back and forth. My girlfriend stopped instantly. The laughter disappeared from her face, because this time she heard it too. There was no confusion, no misunderstanding, no possible explanation. It was clearly the chair, moving, rocking, by itself. She slowly turned toward me. Her eyes were wide. Without speaking, she mouthed the words, "What is that?" Neither of us moved. Then from inside the bedroom we heard something else. The humming. A quiet melody. Soft, slow, almost peaceful. But in that moment it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. My girlfriend took a few careful steps toward the doorway. I followed behind her, and then she saw it. With her own eyes. The rocking chair was moving, and someone was sitting in it. The woman was there, exactly where I had seen her before, rocking back and forth, humming to herself. My girlfriend did not ask questions. She did not try to speak to her. She did not investigate. She simply turned around and ran. And this time, I ran with her. We flew down the stairs, rushed out the front door, and did not stop until we reached the car. The moment we got inside, she started screaming. She kept asking the same question over and over. What the hell did we just see? I had no answer. I just sat there, completely silent. As we drove away, part of me wanted to look back. I wanted to stare at that upstairs window. I wanted to know if someone was standing there watching us leave, but I could not do it. I was too afraid of what I might see. To this day, I still do not know what happened that night. Maybe I really did encounter something paranormal. I understand how impossible that sounds. I know how people usually react to stories like this. There is always another explanation. Maybe it was just an old woman living inside that abandoned house. Maybe she had somehow survived there despite the conditions. Maybe she had found a way to stay hidden, but I have a hard time believing that. The house was falling apart. The front door was boarded shut. The living room floor had collapsed. There was a massive hole leading into the basement. It was not exactly a place where someone would comfortably choose to live. And the strangest part was that she never acted surprised to see us. She never reacted like someone who had discovered strangers breaking into her home. She just sat there, rocking, humming, as if we were the ones who did not belong. Not long ago, I brought the story up with my wife. I asked if she remembered that night. Of course she did. There was no forgetting something like that. We decided to drive back to where the house used to be, but when we arrived, the house was gone. Completely gone. There were no walls, no foundation, no remaining pieces, nothing. It was as if the house had never existed. I still replay that night in my head. I try to remember every detail. I try to picture her face. I try to convince myself there was a normal explanation, that it was just an old woman, that my mind exaggerated what happened. But every time I think about it, I get the same feeling. A feeling deep down that tells me something about that night was not normal. Something was wrong. Something I still cannot explain. Years earlier, when I was in middle school, my family moved into a new house. For a teenager, it felt like the perfect place. The house was bigger than our previous one. The neighborhood had plenty of kids my age. There was always someone outside playing. Everything about the move seemed great. Everything except one thing. Our neighbor. He was the kind of person everyone would describe as the stereotypical angry old man. The moment we moved in, we realized he wanted absolutely nothing to do with us. Whenever we played outside, especially football in the street, he watched us constantly. And if the ball even came close to his yard, he would explode. He would slam his hand against the window. He would shout from inside the house. He would tell us to get away from his property. The strange thing was, we never actually went onto his lawn. We respected his space. We were just kids playing outside. As an adult, I understand why someone might not want children near their property. But this felt different. It was not annoyance. It was anger. It was almost like he was waiting for us. Every time we stepped outside, within seconds he would appear at the window, watching, yelling, demanding that we leave. It continued for months. About 6 months after we moved in, something changed. One day we realized we had not heard from him. No yelling, no banging on the window, no angry voice, nothing. I remember joking with my friends. Maybe he finally died. We laughed. It was just a joke. At least we thought it was. About another month later, my friend Joel stayed over for the night. The next morning we woke up while it was still dark outside. I do not remember the exact time, but I remember the sound. There was a commotion coming from the neighbor's house. Something was happening. Then we noticed flashing lights, red and blue lights reflecting through the windows. We got up and looked outside, and at that exact moment we saw 2 people carrying something out of the house. A body bag. A zipped-up body bag. We immediately knew what it was. I had seen scenes like that countless times in movies, but seeing it in real life was completely different. It felt unreal, and what bothered me most was the guilt. I remembered all the times we joked about him dying, and then he actually did. I could not stop thinking about it. The timing, the silence. The fact that nobody had seen him for weeks, I started wondering if he had been there alone the entire time. Maybe he had already passed away long before anyone found him. I did not know that for certain. Nobody told me. But something about it felt true, a feeling I could not shake. And sometimes the things that disturb us the most are not the things we see. They are the things we realize afterward. After the old man died, the house next door became a place frozen in time. While saying it was empty would not be completely accurate. It was abandoned. Everything he owned remained exactly where he had left it. The furniture, the clothes, the personal belongings. Nothing was removed. Nothing was cleaned out. The house simply sat there year after year, slowly becoming a forgotten monument to the man who had once lived inside. Later we found out that the old man actually had a son, but his son lived in another state and apparently had no interest in returning home after his father passed away. He never came back. He never cleared out the house. He never seemed to care what happened to the place. Thinking about it now, there was something incredibly sad about that. A person could spend an entire lifetime building a home, filling it with memories, and then one day everything they leave behind can simply become abandoned. Over the next few years, I would occasionally find myself staring out my bedroom window. The old man's house was directly beside ours, and from my room I had a perfect view inside. I could see parts of the rooms. I could see the dark windows. I could see the house sitting there silently, and every time I looked at it, I remembered what had happened. The thought that someone had died somewhere inside that house always gave me chills. There was something unsettling about looking at a place where a person had spent years of their life knowing that their final moments were likely spent there alone. As teenagers, my friends and I naturally turned it into a joke. We would always say the house was haunted. We would make up stories about the old man's ghost wandering through the rooms at night. My friend Joel, the same friend who had been with me when we saw the body being carried out, was the perfect person to scare. Joel was always the nervous one. He believed in anything creepy. Every time we had people over, I would tell him that I had seen the old man's ghost looking through the windows. The second I started telling the story, Joel would cover his ears. "Stop. Shut up. I don't want to hear this." Everyone would laugh. I loved messing with people in high school, especially when I had an audience. But one night, Joel decided he had finally had enough. Instead of getting scared, he challenged me. He dared me to go inside the abandoned house. At first, I immediately said no, not because I believed it was haunted. I did not. I just knew breaking into someone's abandoned property was probably not a great idea. But Joel would not let it go. He started making fun of me, calling me scared, calling me a coward. The usual things friends say when they are trying to push you into doing something stupid. I thought about it for a moment, and honestly, I convinced myself it was not a big deal. The house had been abandoned for years. Nobody was living there. Nobody was taking care of it. Who would even know if I walked through it for a few minutes? That was my teenage logic. Looking back, it was not exactly the smartest reasoning. So I walked across the yard and approached the house. My first plan was simple. I would just try the front door. Maybe it would already be unlocked. Of course, it was not. I grabbed the handle. Nothing. I pushed. Nothing. I even tried kicking the door. But I was about 130 pounds at the time, and that door was not moving. Then I noticed a small window beside the entrance. I tried pulling it open. To my surprise, it moved immediately. No lock. No resistance. It slid open like someone had opened it recently. That should have bothered me more than it did. I looked back toward my house one last time to make sure nobody else was watching. Then I climbed through the window. The second I entered, I knew I had made a mistake. The smell hit me immediately. It was overwhelming. The entire house smelled like death. Not just old, not just dusty, something much worse. I instantly felt sick. I pulled my shirt over my nose, trying not to breathe through it. But the smell was everywhere, and the worst part was that everything inside looked untouched. It felt like the old man had simply disappeared. The living room looked exactly how someone would leave it before walking away. His recliner was still there. Next to it was a book sitting open with a bookmark still placed between the pages. A tiny detail, but somehow that made the whole thing feel more disturbing. It showed that this was once someone's normal life. Someone had been sitting there reading. Someone had planned to come back, but they never did. I continued deeper into the house. When I reached the kitchen, the smell became unbearable. This was where it was strongest. A horrible thought crossed my mind. Maybe this was where he had died. Maybe he had collapsed in this room and nobody found him for days. The kitchen looked like a snapshot of the last moment of his life. There was a small table, a sweater hanging over the back of a chair, a coffee mug sitting in front of it. The stove still had old pots and pans resting on the burners. I checked inside them expecting something horrifying, but they were empty. Only dust remained. I quickly left the kitchen and entered a narrow hallway. The first room on the left was the room I could see from my bedroom window. I walked inside and looked out. Across the yard, all my friends were standing at the window of my house. They started waving at me. I waved back. Even from that distance, I could see Joel looked uncomfortable. He was probably wondering why I was still inside. Then, while I was looking at them, I heard it. A loud bang. It came from the other side of the house. Not a small noise. Not the kind of sound an old building naturally makes. It sounded like someone had slammed into the wall. "Art I froze?" Completely still. I listened carefully, waiting for another sound. Footsteps. Movement. Anything. But nothing came. Silence. I looked back toward my friends. They were staring at me with confused expressions. They had no idea why I had suddenly stopped moving, but I knew something felt wrong. Maybe it was the smell. Maybe it was the history of the house. Maybe it was the fact that I was standing inside the place where someone had died. Whatever it was, I was done. I did not care about exploring the rest of the rooms anymore. I quickly walked back to the entrance, unlocked the door, and left. The moment I stepped outside, I felt relief. When I returned home, I told everyone what I saw. I told them about the smell. I told them about the strange feeling inside the house. I told them about the loud bang. We talked about it for a while, but eventually, like most teenagers do, we moved on. The night continued. We eventually fell asleep, or at least I did, until Joel woke me up. I opened my eyes and saw him standing there. I asked him what was wrong. He looked nervous. He told me he could not sleep because he kept hearing strange noises coming from the abandoned house next door. At first, I dismissed him. I told him his imagination was getting carried away. I reminded him that after hearing my story, he was probably just expecting something creepy to happen. I told him to go back to sleep. He did not argue. He just stood there quietly. And then we both heard it. A sound. 2 loud knocks. Slow, heavy. Coming from next door. Joel immediately looked at me, because that was the sound he had been hearing. Every few minutes. I admit it was strange. It was not the normal noise of a house settling. It sounded intentional, like someone knocking from inside. I sat up and looked toward the window. The old man's house was almost completely dark. The only thing visible was the outline of the building against the night sky. Then Joel suddenly grabbed my arm. His voice became shaky. He pointed toward the upstairs window, the same bedroom I had explored earlier. Who was that? I looked. At first I saw what appeared to be a dark shape standing in the doorway of the room, a human-like silhouette, someone standing there, watching. I tried to explain it away. I told Joel it was probably something ordinary, maybe a coat rack, maybe a piece of furniture, maybe a shadow, anything other than a person. But Joel started panicking. No way. His voice changed completely. He insisted that he had seen it move, not a shadow, not a trick of the light. Move. His reaction woke up everyone else. One by one, my friends got out of bed and came to the window. They looked toward the abandoned house. And then something happened that I did not expect. They all agreed with Joel. They saw it too. A figure standing there, inside the old man's bedroom. At that moment, I tried to convince myself it was impossible. There was no way someone could be standing inside that house. The place had been abandoned for years. The doors were locked. The windows were covered. Nobody was supposed to be there. But as we all stared into that dark room, one thought slowly began to enter my mind. Maybe the house was not as empty as we believed. At first, we tried to convince ourselves that there had to be a normal explanation. A trick of the light. A shadow from a piece of furniture. Something inside the abandoned house that only looked like a person from a distance. Because the alternative was something none of us wanted to consider. While we were arguing quietly among ourselves, trying to make sense of what we were seeing, Joel suddenly screamed again. But this time, he did not say a word. He just pointed. There was something different about the way he reacted. It was not like before. Before he was scared. Now he looked completely terrified. I followed his finger toward the old man's house, and my stomach dropped. The figure was no longer standing in the doorway. It had moved. Now, it was standing directly in front of the old man's bedroom window, the exact window I had been staring at from my own bedroom for years. The darkness still made it impossible to see any details. I could not see a face. I could not see clothing. I could not even tell if it was male or female. But because of where it was standing, there was no mistaking what we were looking at. It was the shape of a person, a human silhouette, standing inside that abandoned house, watching. Everyone in the room went silent. All the jokes stopped. All the teasing stopped. Nobody was laughing anymore. We were just a group of teenagers standing at a window staring at something we could not explain. Then the figure moved. Slowly. Deliberately, I watched as it turned and began walking back toward the doorway of the room. The silhouette became harder to see with every step. Then it disappeared completely into the darkness. Gone, just like that. I stayed at the window for several more minutes. I waited for it to appear again. I waited for another movement, another shadow, anything. But nothing happened. The house returned to complete silence. And somehow, that was even more unsettling, because a part of me wanted something else to happen, something that would give us an answer. Instead, we were left staring at an empty window, wondering if we had all seen the same impossible thing. I had no explanation. I remember trying to come up with something logical, anything that would make everyone feel less afraid. So I told my friends that maybe it was the old man's son. Maybe he had finally returned to the house. Maybe he was cleaning something up. Maybe he had come back without telling anyone. It was the only explanation I could think of. And honestly, I think I was saying it more for myself than for them. Because if it was not his son, then what was it? That answer scared me more. For the rest of the night, nobody really slept. Every few minutes, one of us would look back toward the window. We kept watching the abandoned house, waiting, hoping, almost expecting to see that figure appear again. But nothing happened. The house remained dark, silent, empty, or at least it appeared empty. About a year later, I finally met the old man's son. He showed up with a large dumpster and began clearing out the entire house. Years of belongings were removed. The rooms that had sat untouched for so long were finally emptied. Shortly after that, the property was sold. My dad ended up talking with him while he was working. During their conversation, the man explained that he had a terrible relationship with his father. They had been distant for many years. He said it took him a long time to finally return to the house and deal with everything that had been left behind. When I heard that, I immediately thought back to that night. The night we saw something moving inside a house that was supposedly abandoned. A house that nobody was living in. A house where the only person who should have been there was long gone. To this day, that night remains the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed with my own eyes. And what makes it even more difficult to dismiss is that I was not alone. There were multiple people standing beside me. Multiple people who saw the same figure, the same movement, the same impossible silhouette. I understand that our minds can create things that are not really there. Darkness can play tricks on us. Fear can make ordinary things seem supernatural. But when several people see the exact same thing, at the exact same moment, it becomes much harder to explain. Even now, years later, my friends and I still try to meet up at least once a year. We all live in different places now. Life has moved forward. But whenever we get together, that story always comes up. Someone eventually mentions the old abandoned house. Someone asks if we still remember what happened. And every single time we end up having the same conversation. What did we actually see that night? Was there a person inside that house? Was there some simple explanation we never discovered? Was it just a strange combination of shadows, darkness, and our imagination? Maybe. I want to believe there is a logical answer. I want to believe there is something ordinary that explains everything. But after all these years, I still cannot find one. And the most unsettling part is knowing that for one brief moment, all of us were looking at the same thing, a figure standing inside a house that was supposed to be completely empty.